Hi everyone, this is Miranda with Multiplicity Crafts, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of coloring. So I hope you will enjoy today's video. So this coloring page that I'm doing today is a grayscale coloring page, and it's by a wonderful artist on Etsy. I will leave her link down below in case you want to check out some of her artwork. But I really like this grayscale because it shows you exactly where you're supposed to shade and where to leave your midtones and highlights. So I'm going to begin coloring this with a light wash of color. Now this is a very unique medium I'm going to be using. This is from Mr. Pen, and these are their gel highlighters, and they're actually meant to use for books or in your Bible or something of that nature, but I'm going to actually use them for coloring. I find them to be very similar to a distress crayon, but at a fraction of the cost. I also really like that they are a very light wash of color, nothing too harsh and nothing too bold, just a very light wash of color, and that's exactly what I'm looking for in this particular image. I'm trying to make it look a little bit vintage and a little bit like watercolor, but with no water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with the skin tones of these two images, the little girl and the mom. And I'm going to make their skin tones similar but somewhat different because I don't want them to just look like one big blob of color. And so I'm going to make them a little bit different. Plus, I would imagine that the little girl would possibly be a little bit more fair and maybe a little bit more rosy cheeked. So I'm going to color her just a little bit different with maybe more pink undertones than I will the mom. And I'm going to give the mom a purple flower in her hair and a purple blouse, and then I'm going to give the little girl her dress, I'm going to make it pink, and then I'm going to make her flower pink. When I start with these gel highlighters, they are so easy to apply. It almost feels so creamy, like you're applying lipstick or something to your paper. I'm going to begin with the darkest shade. Some artists like to go lightest to darkest, but me, I go darkest to lightest. I'm a little bit backwards. That just has always been the way I've done it, and it just seems to help me map things out a little bit better. So I'm going to go with that. And when I add these colors in, you can see a light wash of color beginning to gradually build up. After I add these in, I'm going to go in with my blending tool and blend those in. I'll have all of these products linked below for you, so be sure to check out those links. And you don't have to stay in the lines perfectly. It doesn't matter because it's such a light wash of color that it's really not going to matter if you're not just perfectly in the lines. Now, when we do her hair and the outer portion of her shirt and things of that nature, you might want to mask your paper a little bit because when you blend it with your blending tool, it will smear onto the white part around the background, I guess you could say. And you don't really want that. But as far as the inner part of the image, the smearing, if you get a little bit out of the lines, it's really not going to be noticeable because we're adding darker shades to her hair and to her top, her blouse, whatever you want to call it, top, blouse, shirt. So we're going to go ahead and continue with the skin, adding the darkest shade, and then when I add my lighter shade, I'm going to somewhat overlap, but not completely, and then blend those all out. You have a little bit of time to blend these. You certainly wouldn't want to let it sit like 30 minutes or even, 20 minutes, I wouldn't say, before you blend it because the waxiness and the creaminess of it is going to dry down. So go ahead and blend that as soon as you can after you lay down the color. But it's not anything you have to rush into. You definitely have some wiggle room time in order to get that blended. As you can see, we're just getting a light wash of color. This is kind of like the underpainting of what I'm going to add before I add colored pencils on top. And this is going to give me a wonderful, wonderful base to work upon and a nice glow underneath my colored pencil work. I'm also going to make her cheeks and her eyelids and lips a little bit more rosy than I am the rest of her skin tone for the mom, as well as for the little girl too. But I think I'm going to play it up a little bit more on the mom to look more like makeup, and then for the little girl just to look more like she's got rosy cheeks and that her eyelids have just a little bit more color, her lips have a little bit more color. So once I have all of this skin tone done, I am going to add colored pencil on top to enhance it. But first, I'm just going in with my gel crayons, or gel highlighters as they're called, and just adding the light wash of color to everything first. I'm going to color the mom's hair kind of a darker brown, and then I'm going to color the little girl's hair kind of a blonde, and that way it'll give me some contrast there as well. So the little girl that's kind of representing my daughter in the picture, she's going to be a blonde because my little girl is somewhat of a blonde, I guess you could say. She has blonde hair, blue eyes, but her hair's getting a little bit darker as she's getting older. At one point, it was kind of like a strawberry blonde. I almost called it rose gold when she was a baby. And then as she got a little older, it just kind of was more blonde, I would say. But now that she's about 3.5, she's kind of more of a ash blonde or kind of a medium blonde. So when I do the little girl's hair, it's going to look kind of orange at first. Don't freak out. It's just because we're on this stark white background that it looks that way. Once we have the colored pencil on top, it's going to give a nice undertone and a nice sheen to her hair. So we are good to go there. Now I'm going to add the brown in for the mom's hair and adding the wash of color with these Mr. Pen gel highlighter crayons. And once I have all of that added, then we'll go in and add some depth to it. For now, we're just doing a really light, airy look to give us a good undertone for the hair. The picture shows this little girl grasping a little flower, but if it were my little girl, she would be holding on to her little stuffed puppy dog that she takes everywhere with her. So speaking of that, I will tell you a story about that as I'm coloring. When someone looks bewildered and confused, we may say that they look like a lost puppy who is wandering around aimlessly. Of course, this is just a figure of speech, but let me tell you a true story about a literal lost puppy and how we can learn something from it. One day, when our daughter Clarissa was nearing her 3rd birthday, we accidentally left home without her favorite toy, a stuffed puppy dog. Her Nana gave it to her as a gift when she was very small, so she had grown up with this toy puppy. In most of her pictures, you will either see the puppy in the background or in her arms. It's so cute to see how attached she is to her puppy. But on this particular day, her puppy got left behind at home. We weren't even a mile down the road when Clarissa realized her puppy was missing. Panic set in, and she began frantically crying, "My puppy, my puppy!" We tried to soothe her, but she was deeply upset. Thankfully, we were able to return home to retrieve her forgotten puppy. The minute we walked in the door, Clarissa ran into her bedroom to locate her puppy. When she found it, she gave it a hug and held it close, as if she were apologizing for leaving it behind. Now, let's parallel this story to ourselves and what we cherish the most. As Christians, we should prize God above all else. Yet so often we wander around like proverbial lost puppies when we leave God behind. We say that we carry God with us always, but do we? When we cave into negative peer pressure, haven't we, in essence, left him behind? When the busyness of life takes over, do we still make ample time to nurture our relationship with him? Do we truly cherish him enough to longingly cry for him when we fail to put him first? I'm reminded of a story I heard once about the late Andrew Murray, a pastor in South Africa. One day, he was walking down the street when he suddenly fell to the ground with a gasp. Some who saw him fall rushed toward him to check on him. The first one to get to him was a policeman. He lifted him back on his feet and asked, "What's wrong? Why did you fall?" Andrew Murray said, "No, leave me be." But the policeman insisted that he tell him what was wrong. Murray realized he was going to have to give this policeman an answer. A tear came down his face as the onlookers were listening. He answered, "Just for a moment, I lost the consciousness of the presence of God." This caused him to physically collapse down to the ground. Do we cherish God this much that we would become grief-stricken to momentarily feel void of his presence? This week, focus on keeping God at the forefront of your mind. You never have to go anywhere without him. God is omnipresent. Psalm 139:8 says, "If I ascend into heaven, you are there, and if I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there." What a cherished friend we have in Jesus. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I think it was just really sweet how we can parallel that to, something so simple as just a little girl's stuffed puppy dog toy to something so profound. So yeah, I hope you enjoy that. But back to the coloring. So I'm just adding this detail work, and on the hair, you don't want to color in big blocks of color. I'm just adding strokes of color. That'll keep my lines looking like lines of hair instead of a big block of color. So that's a tip that you might want to use when you're coloring hair. So I kind of went back and forth on which colors I wanted to use. I'll have the names of all of the colors that I used in her hair shown here. But I used a few different colors because when I first did it, it almost looked too brassy or too Technicolor yellow. I don't know. It was just not the look I was going for. As I'm doing this, I'll kind of see if I like it. If I don't, I can always burnish that down with some white to kind of lighten up that blonde so it's not so in your face, bright yellow, almost like just, too much. So we'll see how it goes as I progress on. When you're doing blonde hair, you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm doing like this really light blonde hair. Why am I adding such a dark brown in here? This is going just to make it look so muddy, so brown. It's not going to look blonde at all. That's actually not true. It will look very blonde. Blonde hair, even really light blonde hair, still has some brown in the shadow. It just depends on which tone of brown you're using and which tone of blonde you're going for. So for this particular one, I am going to go in with a dark brown for her darkest color of her shadows. And you'll see in the end, it blends out wonderfully and it actually looks really good. And it gives the hair some dimension and it doesn't just look all one tone. It definitely brings it to life. So don't be afraid of contrast, because contrast is what makes your drawing, your coloring, just really pop and come to life, I think. So before I make the final decision on the hair as to if I'm going to burnish it or not, I think I'm going to go ahead and do this skin tone and the shirt and the flowers, because if I decide right now, that might not be the best time to decide, seeing how I need to add more color in her skin. So once I add that color, it's going to help me to determine whether or not I need to change the hair at all. Now, before I go into the colored pencil work, let me explain a little bit about the colored pencil work. I'm going to be adding a dark, mid, and light tone. So for her hair, for example, I'll be adding a black for my darkest shadows, a dark brown for the mid-tone, and kind of almost like a light brown, maybe even a skin tone for the highlights. And it seems like a little bit dark if she's just going to have brown hair to go in with black for the shadows. But when it's all said and done, it's going to look really good. And trust me, it will not look too dark. It'll still look really like almost like even a light brown, and it'll still give kind of a watercolor look, even though you wouldn't think it could going in with a black. On the hair, I'm not going to burnish the colors. Some people don't really understand what burnishing is, so let me explain that. That's basically when you go in with like a colorless blender or even a white colored pencil or different lighter colors, and you press firmly to kind of get your colors to blend and to flatten the tooth of the paper, and it just kind of pulls everything together. It even lightens up your look if you're going in with a white. I'm not going to do that on the mom's hair. I may do it on the little girl's hair because I don't want it to look too brassy, but on the mom's hair, I'm definitely not going to burnish that. I'm just going to kind of leave it as is and allow the strokes of the hair to show. When I'm going in with my highlight colors, it will burnish it to a degree because I'm adding more pressure, but at this point, I'm kind of wanting to keep the individual strands of hair going for her darker hair. Now her skin is going to look a little bit washed out once I do the hair. After I add the colored pencil in, it's going to pull the whole look all together, so just trust me on that. Don't feel that the hair's too dark. It's just against that white background, and then before we've added some more color in her skin, it will look a little bit washed out at first, but we'll correct that as we go. And I'm leaving the leaves on both of these flowers just a very minty color, just real light, and I'm letting that gel crayon highlighter just shine through, and I'm just adding one darker shadow shade. That's all I'm doing on the leaves, so the leaves are really easy and quick. So the flowers, it's pretty much like I've been doing dark, medium, light, but on the flowers, since they're such a small surface, I think I'm just going to go with my darkest shade and maybe a mid-tone shade. And the lightest, instead of using a colored pencil, I'm just going to let what I've already laid down with that gel highlighter be my highlight shade or my lightest shade. The same on her shirt. I'm going to be adding the darkest purple shade for the shadows, and then the mid-tone, which would be not the white parts, but not the deep dark parts. So that way you know what the mid-tone is. Kind of a mid lilac color. And then the lightest shades, I'm just going to leave blank because this wash of color that I've added underneath is going to give me that lightest shade. And I think that'll look nice because it's a pastel shade. It kind of lends itself to a watercolor feel, and it is just really light and airy, which is the look I'm going for. Now, as you notice, her sleeve is a little bit transparent, and I wanted to kind of play that up, so I'm going to go ahead and color over everything with the purple, but once I'm finished, I might go in and add some more of the skin tone color with a colored pencil, possibly with a gel highlighter, we'll see. And I'll show you how to make her sleeve look real fluttery and just really transparent and sheer so that it will give you a nice effect. So like I said, we're going to play up her sleeve a little bit more where it's transparent, but for now I'm just getting the color on. And then I'm going to add the little girl, her dress or top. It's going to be pink, So I wanted it to be pink, you know, for a little girl. It's got to be pink. So I wanted to do that color. The reason I chose this purple color for the mom's shirt is because my daughter's nursery was done in kind of this lilac purple color. So it's kind of representative of that for me. Also, purple just happens to be my favorite color. So I thought I would add purple to represent my shirt and my little flower in my hair, if that looked like me at all. I think it's close enough just to get the likeness and the representation of what this means to me. With that little pink rose that the girl is holding and the purple rose that's in the mom's hair, I might not go dark, medium, light on those smaller surfaces. I might just add colors willy-nilly, and so don't be confused by that. I don't want that to confuse you, because grayscale coloring is going to be usually the 3 tones, the darkest, the mid, and the lightest. So don't get confused on that. I'm also adding a little bit of extra color to the little girl's flower because she's holding it right next to her shirt, and I didn't want it to blend in too much with the pink. So I'm making it a slightly different shade of pink than her shirt is pink. So her shirt's more of like a baby pink, and then the flower has a little bit more of a magenta fuchsia quality to it, I guess, but still in a very watercolor-esque tone. Now remember I said at the beginning of the video that I'm kind of going to make the mom's skin tones somewhat different than the little girl's. They're going to be quite similar, but different enough to where they just don't blend into one another as much. The girl, I'm going to add hers a little bit more of a pink undertone, and then the mom maybe more of like a more tan, not so much of a pink undertone. And she's going to look a little bit more like she's got makeup on her face. And then the little girl, of course, I'm not going to put makeup on her. I'm just going to leave her just her natural beauty. But the mom, I am going to add just a little more hint to her lips, her cheeks, and her eyelids to play that up to make it look like the look of makeup. On the mom's eyeshadow, I'm going to go a little bit darker on the outer corners and make it a little bit lighter as it goes in toward the inner corner of her eyes. And that'll just give it a really nice look and look more like makeup, but it'll also just be beautiful. The same way with her lips. Where they're more in shadow, I'm adding it a little bit darker. And then as her lips, the light kind of hits on her lips, I'm not adding as much color and adding a little bit of a lighter touch. You'll notice when I'm going in with the colored pencils, I'm not using just straight line coloring. I'm actually going in either large ovals or little small circle shape, and just very lightly. I'm just extremely lightly coloring. I'm not adding much pressure at all when I'm doing this colored pencil work. When I'm coloring these skin tones, I do have to go in with a very light touch, because if I'm too heavy-handed, I'm not going to be able to layer up these colors to give these undertones of rosiness. And then that light wash of color that I used before with those gel crayon highlighters, that's going to give me a nice glow for the highlight shades, or highlight portions, I should say, of her face. And I'm going to play those up actually with a white gel pen when I'm all done. But I feel that the Grayscale coloring pages and coloring books are so helpful because they teach you so much how to do the dark, medium, and light tones without having to stress about it or think it through. It just teaches you so beautifully, and you get such a wonderful result. It just is so encouraging to you in your coloring and in your art journey. And I would highly recommend these Grayscale coloring pages for learning how to shade and highlight. But I thought this coloring was a lot of fun, and you can even incorporate this into scrapbooking or paper crafting. You could shrink this image down, put it on a card front for Mother's Day, or even cut it out and put it into a scrapbook for like your baby's scrapbook. There's so many possibilities that you can do. I even think this would be beautiful to frame and give as a gift for like a Mother's Day gift or a mother's birthday or a little girl's birthday, something of that nature. I just really like this image, and the artist did a wonderful job on this. Last but not least, I'm doing the mom's shirt. And remember, her sleeves are very fluttery and very sheer. And so I want her arm to kind of show through on the sleeve part. And that's the only part that I'm adding more of the skin tone, just so it looks like you can see her arm underneath the sleeve. However, I'm not leaving it only that flesh tone color. I am adding the purple on top as well. So where I'm adding the highlights, I'm going to actually color that in a flesh tone color instead of just leaving it like a light purple or white. I'm coloring it in flesh tone, and then I'm going to go in with my white gel pen at the very end and add some more detail. On the little girl's eyelashes, when I did the hair, they kind of got lost, and when I did the skin tone and the blending, they kind of got softened a little bit too much. So I can go in and darken her little eyelashes, her eyebrows, and then that dark part inside of her mouth, just that black part, as well as like her nostrils, and then the mom, her eyelashes, I can go in and redefine those, as well as her eyebrows, just so it's not all just kind of blended and too soft. I want to add a little bit of definition. So at this point, I can add some of the fine details. I can go in and redefine the eyelashes, the eyebrows. I can darken in like the little girl's nostrils, her little mouth that's open, darken all that in. If there's any other places that I see that I need to touch up, now is a good time to do that. If I want to add some little bright white pops of color with my gel pen, this finishing touch part is going to be when I'm doing that. And so I am going to add some highlight on the mom's face just to give it a dewy, fresh look. This almost feels like doing makeup, you know, where you would add like your highlighter for your makeup, like the inner corner of your eye, down the bridge of your nose, you know, on your chin, kind of, you know, your cheekbones, your brow bones. That's where they say, you know, in makeup, that's where you want to add your highlights and everything. So yeah, so I'm kind of doing that the way I would do makeup, and I'm just doing it with a gel pen. So that's kind of fun. And you don't really want bright white, and so after I add the gel pen, I kind of go in and dab it with my finger while it's still wet, just to make sure that it's not like this stark white dot or stark white line. On her sleeves, I'm just adding a few highlight shades, just some stripes of color more or less. Some of them a little bit wider, some of them a little bit more narrow, and some on the curve of the sleeve and some on the outside of the sleeve. I'm also playing up those purple shadows on her sleeve, because if we don't, it's just going to look really flat and it's not going to look translucent at all, even though you would think, oh, translucent, you know, we don't want to add a lot of opaque color. Well, you don't, but in the shadows, it's definitely fine, and it's still going to look transparent and sheer, even with the opaque colors of purple in the shadows. And at this point, the coloring is pretty much finished. If you want to add a halo around the image or a background, you can always mask the image and add like a distressing background, or you can do with your gel crayons, you can go around and maybe smudge out a nice soft background, or even go in with your colored pencils and just add maybe a shadow around the image. Or you can just leave it like it is. It's totally up to you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And also remember, all of these wonderful products I have linked below, and I have a link to my book in there if you're interested. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have tried grayscale coloring before, and if you think you might try it. I would love to know. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.